Hello and welcome to the review, the responses we got for the 10 questions for atheists.
So that what is going on with my camera?
They have properly been drinking and on drugs, so these answers are probably going to get better as they progress.
Getting massacred.
Just want to make sure that I can be heard, essentially.
What are you guys talking about?
Well, a lot of people are going to hate this, but typically I just use the term atheist.
You know, I think there's only the natural world. Reality is exhausted by nature.
That's the best face. That's the best face ever. I'm really happy with that.
We're going to get like
This is a philosophy channel now, and they're going to be reviewing this, so they will pick on you.
These questions really sound like they're written by a theist, right?
Hello and welcome to the review of the responses for 10 questions for atheists. I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And today we are bringing you one of our favorite topics. It was a moral question. And the question asked was, do moral statements such as it's wrong to torture a small child for fun express truth? If yes, where does the truth come from? And if no, what do you think they express? Now, there was a little bit of contention about why I even put in the word for fun. And I understand that. I do understand that, because most people would go, well, you know, torturing a small child or torturing anyone, that's just wrong. But there are some people who like to respond to questions in a way where they can sort of not answer with the intent of the question. They will go, well, what if torturing that one child for fun could, cure all the cancer and disease and suffering and make sure that everybody's life was absolutely perfect forever? Then it would be worth it, wouldn't it? Or, you know, they'd come up with this completely unreasonable explanation of why it could be justifiable in a certain circumstance under a particular moral theory. So the idea was to lock it down to a way that hopefully no one would say that it was moral, but they might have a different of opinion of whether it can be true or not, or whether it is, you know, just emotions or something like that. Now, before we go into the answers from people, I think we should just explain what we mean when we're discussing things like ethics and morality. So, morality is the principles of good and bad, or right and wrong behavior. And ethics in the English language is pretty much the same thing, but not always. Ethics can sometimes be used to be, you know, the study of morality or thinking about morality. And you'll tend to find in other non-English speaking languages that this distinction is nearly always there. It's usually that further thoughts on morality. Morality are the different systems, and ethics is the thoughts in it, the justifications and everything like that. Yet, generally, English-speaking people will use ethics and morality interchangeably. Though that's not always what happens. I mean, Dave, we quite often come across people who haven't spent any time studying any ethics or morality, and they have quite a unique definition of the two, don't they?
Yeah, for some people that I come across, or that we've come across, it generally, they'll see it as morals are our personal opinion about what's right and wrong, and ethics are the society's opinion about what's right and wrong.
Yeah, and what they're doing there is they're basically describing moral subjectivism and moral relativism. So just before we go into it, Dave, can you give us a quick description of both of those?
Okay, moral subjectivism, it can come in several different forms, but generally what most people talk about is that what makes the moral, something moral or immoral, is your subjective opinion of it. and it's true for you that, say, stealing is immoral. It's a claim that you make, and for you it's true. When you say, stealing is wrong, you're saying that stealing is wrong according to you. And moral relativism can be seen as basically the idea that each culture defines the truth of the moral. So it could be true that it's moral in one country to kill somebody for having an abortion, just to bring up something kind of topical. And in another country, it's considered immoral just to have the death penalty at all.
Yeah, and actually, this can also span across time. That's one thing that sometimes people forget. So we're under relativism. Something like if slavery was considered moral, then at that time it was moral under moral relativism. And if you ever look back and go, well, no, it was never moral, then you're sort of contesting what moral relativism is. So that's sort of what we're going to be delving into tonight. Now, there's obviously part of the question was asking if moral statements express truth. So that is basically the meta ethical question of, is there a form of truth within the moral statements? If so, where does it come from? And if not, what does it express? And we've had a number of different responses, and they've all given very different ideas, although there have been some that are quite close to each other. So when we have some videos that are very similar in answer, we're actually going to play them both and then answer them both together. And other times, even if someone's holding the same position as someone else, we may well separate it out just so we can discuss the nuance between their position and someone else's. And first tonight we have TMM and Dujaun.
Sometimes it expresses emotions, but often it also expresses how a person intends to react to or engage with a particular behavior. Since I don't believe that rightness or wrongness exist as these free-floating platonic forms independent of human minds, if I were to say theft is wrong, all I would mean by that is I oppose theft. Theft is something I would try to prevent, obstruct, and or disincentivize. It's a statement about my relationship with the act of theft more than it's one which describes a property of theft.
No, I think they express one's preferences or conscience. Morals are relative to human beings and other social animals that have the capacity.
Okay, so that first one was Dujaun and TMM. And they both say that the moral statements express kind of preferences or opinions about something. It says, basically, they say that it says what we think of some action. So, I think lying is wrong means I just don't like lying, and I don't think you should lie. They're morally I suppose you could say that their morals motivate them to be opposed to certain actions, but they don't argue that there is a particular truth to them beyond the truth that you believe these things about these moral statements.
Yeah, so they're not saying that it actually makes it true. They're basically non-cognitivists, and what they seem to be describing was, emotivism or expressivism. So that's one position for tonight, and I can understand it. I don't personally think it tells the whole picture of morality. I think that there is definitely something more to it. Perhaps that's how we first started learning about morality. But it seems to me like there is just something a bit more. Though I do understand why people would take this particular position.
It's a pretty common position among atheists as well, even if a lot of them don't quite understand that that's what they're saying. Although there are many who sort of say that morals are like this, but then will also go on to say, well, the Bible is completely immoral, And even if you believe it's moral, it's still not moral, or say something like the Bible promotes slavery and slavery has always been wrong. So, yeah, some atheist attitudes towards it can be a bit confused.
Yeah, I think that is part of the problem with this sort of thing. It's an error in the language. I actually wrote an article about this. I think it's subjectively wrong. I think it was where it's when people are saying these sort of statements, rather than saying, the Bible is immoral, they're going, well, I think it's immoral. They're not saying it's actually immoral, even though they are saying it's actually immoral. But if they hold this stance, there is no actually immoral. They're just saying, I don't like it. It makes go, I don't think you should do that. I don't think you should follow those morals. I think you should follow these morals. But there is no real truth to it. I think that's one of the problems I actually have with the non-cognitivist theories myself, because I do think there's a certain truth to it. Torturing a baby, I don't think torturing a baby for fun should be something that is regarded as, well, yeah, I don't like the idea. I think that it is wrong regardless of what you think.
Yeah. And just in case, I'm not saying TMM and Dujaun have made this mistake, because they're both very clued up people. It's just this is a common thing that we see.
No, of course. I mean, I to be honest, I don't know enough about their takes on this. This is obviously a short answer from the both of them, so I couldn't say either way. But we're talking about conversations that we have had with others in the past who hold similar positions, and I don't think that they would make that mistake. Like you mentioned, Dave, they're quite well versed on what they say. So next tonight, I think we've got Danish Debater.
So yeah, I do think it expressed a form of truth. I think it expressed the truth value of our evaluations of desired social outcomes and agreed upon rules, things that I find is grounded in a combination of our cultural and biological evolution. These are different things that will be beneficial, or at least be perceived to be beneficial, to the survival of both the individual and the society, with a focus on the individual, so that, for instance, it would be considered by many morally wrong to steal food, but it would be morally okay to steal food to survive. It would also be okay to steal food to make sure your kid survives, but it starts to be a gray area if you steal food to go out and find starving people and give it to them. Even though it would be okay that you give the food to the starving people, the stealing suddenly becomes more immoral. So I think we have a grounding of morals that focuses on people closer to your family and then outwards. And I think we could also see this as societies tend to get more resources. It seems that morals, or the interpretation of morals, shifts a bit.
And that was Danish Debater. And he says, moral statements express a form of truth, however, not necessarily speaking of propositional truth, but what people might believe to be truth. As he said, it expresses a truth value of desired social outcomes and agreed upon rules from biological and cultural evolution. So it sounds like he's discussing something between moral particularism and moral relativism / subjectivism. Potentially a form of value pluralism based on the statement about moral duties towards family and the fact he mixes in the cultural and personal values. So, Dave, we've already covered off, what moral relativism and moral subjectivism are. But could you describe what moral particularism is for me?
Okay, moral particularism is the idea that we have certain intuitions within us that can help guide us towards the moral choices, and and that we can work these things out not based on general guiding principles, but on the situation themselves and how it feels and the knowledge that we've gained before. So that's basically it. We can have moral knowledge, and we don't need general guiding principles to it. We can figure it out based on the situation.
That's fair. And I mean, with that, it's not necessarily something that's true. It's still more of that gut reaction, isn't it? Based on the situation. It
depends on the type of moral particularism. Some believe that there is no real moral truth to be found, but some think that, you know, there are moral truths that we can get at through our moral intuitions.
There. And, you know, it also could be a form of value pluralism. So would you like to tell us what that is as well?
Yep. Value pluralism is the idea that there are always multiple values at play when it comes to morality. So there may be duties in conflict, there may be a different way of assessing the situation, and we can think of moral particularism, but there are certain moral duties and values that guide us, and we can have general principles on how to work them. So, say we can mix utilitarianism, deontology, preference satisfaction, all that kind of thing. And in certain situations, certain values take more precedent than other values. So we can have a mix of moral guidelines to kind of work from.
And something like that can obviously help out with something like the problem of dirty hands, can't it?
It can, because if you're stuck in deontology where you have these two situations, which is it's always wrong to torture, but you should also be doing your best to save as many lives as possible. Your duty is to, you know, protect as many lives as possible. There can be a conflict there. So we can go with some other guiding principle to try and help us break this deadlock and try to bring about the best situation.
Yeah. And if you're interested in moral particularism, value pluralism, or the problem of dirty hands, we've done streams on them all in the past. I think they were all with Kristen as well, weren't they? And I think even Bearded Heretic was there for one of them. Definitely worth checking out. I do enjoy a moral conversation. But thank you for that, Danish Debater. And next tonight, we're going to join these two together. We're going to have Lone Wolf and Bitchspot blog.
I think at the core of most moralistic instincts, and I want to separate moralistic arguments from moralistic instincts. And I do very much think that morals are inherent in a societal framework. But I think there's a moral instinct that goes beyond that societal or spans across multiple societies. And that instinct really comes down to that whole do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's more like, you know from experience how it would feel if something like an incident or a pain would happen to you, and you wouldn't want that thing to happen to you. And I think there's an innate built-in framework. Humans aren't built to just create pain. That's something that has to be taught to us. The act of creating pain as children causes great upheaval and great upset. But there's also another moralistic argument that are basically ethics that have been elevated to the point of objectively agreed upon in a societal framework. And those ethics are at that point considered morals. Morals are objectively agreed upon ethics in a societal framework, unless you're talking about that innate moralistic instinct, which is a completely different beast and more psychological than philosophical in my eyes.
Morality comes from a combination of enlightened self-interest and empathy. We decide individually how we would like to be treated, and therefore, because presumably we want to be treated well, we treat others that way in hopes that they will reciprocate. I don't want to be murdered, therefore I don't run around murdering others. I don't want to get stolen from, so I don't steal your stuff. That all tends to get codified into law by society, and ultimately, whether anyone likes it or not, it's majority rule. The most people get the laws in place that they want to see, and it's an eternal juggling act to see what might happen tomorrow. Because here's the thing, there's nothing that is absolutely right or absolutely wrong. It's all a value judgment. Now, I have my views, you have your views, somebody over there has their views, and that's fine. Because we might have been raised in the same culture, and therefore a lot of our views might coincide. I think the same thing about murder that you probably do. But I might not think the same thing about murder as somebody in another culture. And when it comes down to two people who do not share the same views having a disagreement, that's where we have to have a discussion. And discussions are one thing that the religious are really terrified of. They really want a single objective standard for morality, one that they made up on their own and then say, well, God said so, because that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to set God up as this arbiter of absolute morality so they don't have to think about any of it. But that's not really how any of this actually works in the real world. Because there's absolutely nothing that is automatically right or automatically wrong. Ultimately, absolutely all of it is just a negotiation.
Okay, and that was Lone Wolf also, a very good friend of the channel, an awesome guy. And also Bitchspot blog, who is kind of the opposite. But they both discuss the idea of empathy being behind morality. There's this sort of do unto others kind of sense to it, I suppose, a golden rule kind of idea. And I'll go with Bitchspot blog first because he talks about enlightened self-interest. So I guess that's the idea where if we all just look after our own self-interests and we use our empathy and try not to harm others, then, you know, that's a good enough framework to go by. And all those that work and sort of the more common ones get codified into a central legal system. So most people don't like to be robbed. So therefore it gets coded into law that, you know, stealing is wrong and illegal. So he argues that there is no actual truth, because there's nothing that we can actually point to in the real world and say, well, it's not like that's a flower. You know, it's an opinion more than anything. And Lone Wolf, this sort of goes back to what we were saying at the beginning, where some people use ethics to refer to a wider area. So like social morals. And morals are a personal thing. Ethics are things that are objectively agreed in a societal framework. And as they get codified in and get bigger, there's sort of moral arguments over those instincts, and people are convinced, unconvinced, and it kind of grows and grows and grows. He also argues that we have an a built-in framework innately. So there are certain moral instincts within us, and then they motivate our moral intuitions.
Yeah, and what he's talking about there with the whole societal framework is like then going, yeah, you know, those arguments are what come above those instincts, you know. Yeah, I sort of understand this sort of take. It's not obviously not one that I have, so I think there's more to morality. I think there's more to the whole picture. But I can understand how, when you're looking at how things seem to work, that does seem to be how it sort of looks in practice. If you're looking at things, you can see that from person to person that they seem to have a different idea of what is and isn't moral. And when you look at different cultures, they have a different sort of moral opinion, if you will, that relativistic scale, and quite often the culture's morals do get codified into law. So when you're looking at it, it does sort of seem like this is how it works. The question is that all there is to morality? Just because something works that way? Is there anything more to it? If it got codified into law that we should torture small children for fun, would that make it moral to do so? I mean, it would make it legal, but would that make it moral to do so? If the culture thought it was moral to kill homosexuals or atheists, would that actually make it moral for that culture to do so? If someone has a different innate built-in framework where they think it's perfectly fine to go around torturing animals, does that make it moral to do so, or is there something more? Obviously, I have a bias, and I'm fully aware of that, so I'm trying not to let too much of that out and just ask the question rather than fully give you my opinion. But I 100%, if anyone's going, well, you're clearly giving that a biased reading. Yes, of course I am. That's what we do. That's what all of us do. I'm fully aware that I have a very particular opinion on this subject, but I do enjoy discussing different ideas, and it does make me think a bit more about my own position and certain parts where it might be weaker or lacking. So I do enjoy these conversations. Anyway, next tonight we have Rev, who I'm very much looking forward to.
Again, I refer to Russell Bertrand, who said that if morals are orange juice, truth is toothpaste. I just don't think the two mix at all. The truths are the truths, and the morals depend on the person. And I don't believe that morals, I think truth has to be something that's the same for everybody. More morals, they really don't. And sometimes it's better to adhere to morals than it is to the truths. For example, like the Nazi scientists, they were doing all kinds of stuff in the name of science, but certainly that's not cool. That the morals there were not needed to go in front of whatever truth they had.
So that was Rev N Fidel. Always a pleasure to have him on. And if you haven't checked out the video that we did with him where he told us about his journey between Christian Science and atheism, definitely check it out. It was wonderful having him on. And if you haven't seen all of his answers to the 10 questions, check them out. You'll be laughing, and he makes some amazing points. However, with this one, he says that he thinks morals and truths are two different things. So this would lead me to believe he's talking about some form of non-cognitivism. He mentions that he thinks that truth has to be true for everyone. The problem with that is, in reality, people don't always agree on what's true. For example, even the shape of the Earth, right? Now, it is true for everyone, but people don't agree on what's true. So morality could have a truth, even if people didn't agree on it. It would still be true for everyone. It's just some people would disagree with it. And you can even have other kinds of truths as well. If I have a favorite band, it's still my favorite band. If I think this band is the best, that's me expressing that I think they're the best. They're not necessarily the best in the world, though. But it's still true for everyone else that is my band, but people can disagree with me. So there's two different types of truth that I've just brought up there. There's obviously my personal preference. It's something that is true for me. And there's something that is true for everyone, the shape of the Earth, but people still disagree on that. So morality could have that sort of truth. People could argue over it, but there is still that truth there. What he does mention, though, is that sometimes what's moral is more important than what is true. For example, the Nazi experiments. So I think what he's saying there is, obviously the Nazi experiments advanced science, but the morality of the situation was bad. It was something immoral. So even though there were truths that they got out of these experiments, it would have been better not to have got those truths because it was immoral. From what he was saying, he does largely seem to view morality as this sort of non-cognitivist thing, but there did seem to be that maybe there was cognitivist subjectivism coming through as well. I'm not entirely clear on which, but you could argue much of a muchness with that one.
I can sort of see where he's coming from. Like, I sort of agree that if there is moral truth, then they would be true for everyone. So if it's wrong to put 6 million people to death for their kind of how they were born, then that, that would be true, that it was wrong. And that would be true for everybody, even if everybody doesn't believe it, like you said. But I totally agree that sometimes the morality of a situation is more important than getting at the truth of the situation. Like, that's the whole reason that we have ethical guidelines when we're doing psychological research and medical research. And like, we're supposed to have business ethics. So sometimes the ethics of how we conduct our business is more important than getting more money. I think there's a lot to be said for something like that. But again, it's kind of distinguishing between different kinds of truths. So we could say that there is a sort of value pluralism thing going on here, where sometimes the obligation to protect the innocent is greater than actually using them to get at some form of truth.
Yeah, that's fair. I can agree with that. So thank you, Rev. Interesting answer, as always. And next night, we're going to just load up the Mathpig stream. They do have some different answers, but I figured it's probably just easier to play them all at once. And, we'll address them all together at the end.
I feel like children are always
Right,
just
we're
like
gonna let's not talk about eating kids, okay? YouTube's getting very fucking up their own ass about this sort of shit. We can't even have a joke anymore. But
I already said I'm fucking vegetarian. I feel like cannibalism is covered under that.
Is he basically just asking?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Is he basically just asking where do you get your morals from? Yeah.
No, he's asking this age-old question, right? One of the main arguments that you hear from theists is that look, there are such things as objective morals. You can't have objective morals without God, therefore God exists.
That's exactly what I'm asking.
So it comes down to your position on what you think objective truth is. It comes down to what you think the objective is. It comes down to what you think is your particular theory of truth and your particular theory of morals, realism, anti-realism. So it's one of these what do they call nothing, and it's a nothing burger of a question.
I've got, it's not diagnosed or anything like that there, but doing tests and things like that, I come across as functioning Asperger's, and one of the things and one of the symptoms is we know that we're better than everyone else. So I'm better than all of you anyway. So I know this.
Hey, we could be SPs too.
No.
In some ways,
morality is not objective. It's definitely subjective to society. If anyone's seen that stream we did a wee while ago with the guy from fucking California, he made more points. Huh?
Danny?
I can't remember. No, not Danny. This guy was only on once. It's not. Sounds like Antangelo, but wasn't Antangelo. Alejandro.
Alejandro.
He was in his car. He drove around. He did a stream driving around in the car for a stage. I was like not happy at all. But yeah, no, objective and subjective morals. Morals they come from society. Everything has its context. I could punch Mr. Willis in the face and throw him off a stage, and he'd really dislike me. But if someone had my child kidnapped and told me that's what I had to do, things have context. It's there. There's things as an evolutionary stage.
Right?
There's things as an evolutionary point of view, which have been tied together with a morality and an emotional feeling. You don't want someone to be murdered because it feels bad. It's an emotional pain if you lose your parent or your brother or your sister or anything like that. But from a society point of view and an evolutionary point of view, if you kill everybody in your tribe not going to go on. So it's a conflation of the two.
But okay, so then to me it brings me back to like that whole moral dilemma of like the train switch and then the hospital organ donor, which are you guys all familiar with that?
The trolley problem.
Right, where there's however many people on the track,
and the
if you flip
baby.
the switch, you'll only kill one.
Yeah, the trolley problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus if you've got a person who's a fucking universal donor and you've got 16 people that are waiting on different various organ transplants, you can't just like kill that person to harvest their organ to save.
Oh well, the trolley
16.
problem. Yeah, it has
exactly.
multiple different. Yeah.
It's almost as useless as the original question. I'll say that, the trolley problem, because it's all things being equal and all of this shit. Well, what happens if the one person is your child? Then obviously you're not going to choose that. I mean, come on now.
Right.
We got to be reasonable, and I think that in itself shows that morals are subjective in the sense that theists mean objective. Right, and by objective, they don't mean external to mind. What they mean is external to human mind, right? Because they are saying that things that are objective, moral objectives, are grounded in the nature of their God.
They've outsourced that responsibility.
Right? So exactly. So again, it purely comes down to the definitional truth here. Yeah, subjectivism, that's fine if you think that the only alternative is independence of all mind, then fine. But I don't think most people mean objective by that. What they mean is objective to a particular standard, which is external to mind. And that's the difference that I generally see. Where does truth come from? Depends on your theory of truth, right? If you think truth is just a reflection of reality, well, that's where truth comes from, right? No, what do they express? Well, again, personally, I would give some kind of evolutional argument for morals, and therefore that's what they're expressing: the state of the evolution of mankind.
That they've conflated.
Anyway, that's just my short.
No, I agree with you, Simos. Yeah, there's a lot of evolutionary reasons for why we do what we do that they've conflated into spirituality and religion and stuff like that, and giving it an objective point of view more so than an evolutionary point of view. Krishna, thank you for subbing. Thank you. Fabio, go on. Be nice.
It is a very confusing question. So because it conflates two things that I don't know, they go together. So truth is a qualifier that you assign to a statement. There are various kind of truth. You can have mathematical truth, scientific truth, faith truth, historical truth. You can have judiciary truth. And they're all different depending on the context that we're talking about. A moral statement is just something that it's just a claim of something that is it's either morally good or bad, right or wrong, and morality, in my view, comes from the it's like a common agreement of the society you live in.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some things that might be morally right for the society you live in, and there's some things that they're not, depending on the society. And it's not just a matter of time; it is also a matter of location, of culture, of whatever the hell. I mean, around here, the death penalty, it is not morally right.
No.
In the U.S. right now, there are states where it is morally accepted.
I think there's two still do it, isn't it? Two states still have two states still have the electric chair. That's where I was going. There's still two states in America that actually
the electric chair has not been used in a very long time.
There's still two though that haven't removed it. There's still two that have that option in America.
And I believe that in those two states, it's literally up to the prisoner. Like they get to choose, like, do you want lethal injection or like they still get that as an option.
I was just making a point. I was just reinforcing Fabio's point that, you know,
Right,
there's a
right.
variety
So-
of ways to kill your prisoners in America, including the electric chair in 2 states, and most people would think that's a bit fucked up.
Well, to be fair,
that was, I mean, that was an extreme example. You know, you can say the same thing with drugs. You can say the same thing with abortion. You can say the same thing with divorce. I mean, it's not just a matter of time. It's also a matter of the society you live in. What we all accept as morally okay, it is, you know, morally okay in the society you live in. That's it. You know, it's
yeah. No, I would agree with that. Yeah, yeah. Willis, have you answered?
No, I'm going to be as quick as I can. Promise. I actually think this is a really tough question in many respects, and it goes beyond the scope of today. If I was to rant about it, so I really will try and keep it quick. I think, of course, it depends on who you are, where you are, when you are. But if you genuinely consider yourself a moral person, you have some kind of responsibility to check and to understand your morals, and you know to think about where they come from, why you have them, and how relevant they are. So I was born in 1980, and we used to use gay as an insult, for example, not really meaning someone was homosexual, but you know I have made jokes against homosexuals when I was growing up, and I'm not proud of that now, and I wouldn't do that again. You know, that's not how I roll.
Society changes, people grow up.
It does, and now I find myself I'm on Twitter, and you know you will have seen I'm sort of vigorously trying to defend trans people and trying to stop TERFs, and I feel like I'm not at the forefront of that. That's putting it far too strong, but you know that's kind of one of the battlegrounds where I'm fighting at the moment. And I look at my kids, and I'm like, in 20, 25 years, I'll be 60 odd. They'll be thinking, why did anybody ever have a problem with someone being trans? It's probably not even a conversation point anymore, right? But by that time, I'll be the old bastard who's saying, well, you know, I was pretty liberal in my day, but I don't think you should be sticking wires in the back of your head to have sex with someone or whatever it is, you know. And I don't want to be that miserable old bastard. So you've got to, I think you have a duty to try and stay ahead of the curve if you consider yourself a moral person, you know. You don't need to wait for that.
Well, that's weird that you said
it's
it's just, Mr. Willis, I find it weird the way you just made that statement. You have to stay ahead of the curve if you consider yourself a moral person. To me, you saying that means you need to read what society deems as and stay ahead of it. And my morality will also come from me too. And I'm not, you know,
of course, yeah.
You know, rather than trying to stay ahead of the curve and I want to be the moral person because of what everybody in society says. Don't be a sheep. Think for yourself as well. Fight back about stuff. You know, society can be wrong. They're not wrong in this. But
yeah, of course.
society.
I don't want to wait for something to be generally accepted before I accept it. If I sit back and have a big think about it, you know.
Okay, so the first one was Simos. He doesn't kind of really give an answer. He says that the question is a nothing burger. So I would assume that to him, it means that the question is a kind of irrelevant question. He mentions that it depends on your theory of morals and your theory of truth. And we can sort of, and also your idea of what objectivity means. So if we have this set of standards that we follow, then we can get objective answers from that moral theory. But it's not objective as in one size fits all.
I wonder why he thinks it's nothing burger, though. I mean, it's one of the cornerstone questions of morality. You know, does it actually express any form of truth at all? And one thing I will comment on here is, you know, objective doesn't necessarily mean it's one size fits all. I mean, things can have a contextually correct truth. So you could have like a general rule that it's wrong to steal, for example, but you could have a situation where actually it would be the moral thing to do. But that's neither here nor there. I just think that sometimes people confuse objective with absolute. and think that, if there is this one rule, then it is this one rule for everyone all time. And then it goes on to Mathpig, who mentions, something is subjective to society. So basically, he speaks of moral relativism there, and he mentions, things have context. Which, yeah, okay, cool. We've already addressed moral relativism, so I won't go into this one into too much detail. But we sort of understand the position. It's how it seems to work. It's what you can see happening out there in society. I just think that there is more to it than that.
Okay, and then we have Mr. Willett, who kind of gives a bit of a weird thing kind of answer. He says that morals are relative to the society and to the time, but then he talks about how when he was younger, he used gay as an insult. And he now realizes that it was the wrong thing to do. So I guess you could argue that he's learned that it's not acceptable today, but he kind of makes a statement like he thought it was wrong to do at the time as well. It's just that he's now realized the action that he was doing at that time, which means that it can't quite be relative to the time and the place, because if it was wrong then there is a standard above the culture. And he also talks about how we should try and stay ahead of the curve, which again is another weird thing to say if you're going to say that, morals are relative to the time and the place, culture. Because if they're relative to the time and the place and the culture, there is no curve to stay ahead of. And I guess you could say that you're arguing for a kind of moral subjectivism in that your morals should always be something that you feel is better. He argues that we should always try and reach a higher level of morality than what the culture is currently situated at, which to me kind of states that there are guiding principles that are above personal opinion and opinion of the society and the time and the place. So it's kind of a weird, confusing answer, and there seems to be some contradictions in what he says, at least as far as I can unpack anyway.
Yeah, he also says if there's no harm, it's not immoral as well. So, I mean, that's again making a almost a realist statement. So again, he seems to actually, from the way it sounded, and this may not be the case, maybe I've misunderstood what he said, but it does seem to be that he is arguing for a form of moral realism under the guise of moral relativism. Again, maybe I just misunderstand him. I mean, how about you lot out there? You tell me what you think about that answer, because that's what I got from it. His basically seems to be going for that sort of objective moral values. And then we had Fabio, who we have noticed a few times he gives sort of non-answers or does what he can to not actually answer the question. And he said it's a confusing question because it conflates a statement and different types of truth, and the moral statement is just a claim. I mean, if it's a claim, is he saying it's basically a proposition, so it can be true or false? And then is he sort of contradicting himself there? He also then seems to speak of moral relativism, which again is in conflict with his first answer between, that statement and about conflating statements and different types of truth and morals being relative. It was all a bit all over the place. I'll conclude that I think, again, he's sort of saying moral relativism, but isn't exactly sure. Maybe it's a topic he hasn't looked into much, which is fine. I'm not expecting everyone to have looked into this stuff in detail. Most people haven't, and there's so many more things I don't understand about the world. And I've only scratched the surface of morality, but it's just something I know a little bit more than average about. So I can understand why this statement does seem so confused, but yeah. Did you get anything else from that one, Dave?
No, it was kind of hard for me to unpack that one as well, to be honest with you. It kind of meanders all over the place, and there's nothing really concrete to hold on to except for his claim that morals are relative.
Yeah. So, I mean, Fabio, if you want to explain what you mean in more detail, I'd love to know further. I do apologize if you feel misrepresented. I'm not trying to. Just let me know. And last, Savage Minnow tried to speak, but you didn't let her answer, you misogynistic bastards.
Yeah, she started talking about the trolley problem, and then that was it.
Yeah. But yeah, no, thank you very much for those answers, guys. And next tonight we have Brina.
So I think with the goal being well-being, I think that there are definitely true moral statements that can come out of that. I don't think morality is, I don't know that that means morality is necessarily objective. I think it can be objective just depending on what question, I guess, like you're asking in the society, that like, what is your end goal? If your end goal is this, then I think the answer can be objective. The way that you get there might be a little bit more subjective, which is why we have, like, you know, people who vehemently disagree as far as how we govern societies and things like that. So obviously people, I mean, it is subjective in a way because people have different ideas of how to run a society and how to care for people, and you know, the way that we support our fellow human beings through, let's say, you know, certain what's the word I'm looking for? Like certain policies and funding that goes towards, like, I guess, like Medicare for all and health insurance and supporting people that are in poverty and things like that. There's an argument, I guess, to be made where I obviously feel like I'm in the right to think a certain way in terms of like policy and in terms of politics. But then there's also an argument to be had about how we get to the place that I think that we should get at. You know, if that means reducing poverty rates or eliminating poverty altogether. You know, how do we get there, I guess, is where things get a little bit muddied. So yeah, I guess that's my long-winded answer. I don't know. It's a complicated one because obviously nobody's comfortable with saying like morality isn't, I guess, completely like some people feel like it has to be a truth that exists even without our existence. But to me, that doesn't make sense because like it's like the idea, even what he said, like it's wrong to torture children for fun, of course. But like, would that be true if humans didn't exist? Like if nothing existed, is that like a truth that just exists on its own? Like that doesn't really make sense to me. So it can't really be objective because it is fully dependent on our existence and the way that, you know, like the fact that we are here at all and the societies that we built. It's not something that would just exist without us ever even being here, I guess, is kind of how I see it. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, I don't think morality comes from organized religion. I think morality, somebody said they don't think morality. I don't think religion is necessary for morality at all. I know a lot of religious people would obviously disagree with that, but that's kind of what I was saying here because I think morality comes from our ability to empathize with each other and with other species. And I know that's not an ability that everyone has, but I think as a whole, that is what our species has evolved into being, especially with, you know, when you also consider the fact that we are a social species and our lives and our well-being are very much dependent on our interactions with each other and, you know, the care and love that we have for our friendships and relationships and how that grows into other places, you know, outside of our personal circle and just caring for people in general.
Okay, and that was Brina. another friend of the channel and somebody you should go subscribe to immediately because she's absolutely fantastic. Her argument, or she sort of sees morality as expressing truth, but what they express as truth is sort of what the society themselves believes, sort of similar to Danish Debater, in that we can find out what a society believes is moral and not moral based on statements that are made. And she says that the goal of the species itself is survival, and that we're an empathetic and a sociable species. So these kind of drive the moral desires, or at least that's how I'm interpreting it. And that's kind of what drives the social morals that kind of get encoded into society. She also argues that if we have a goal in mind when it comes to creating these morals, or there's a goal for the morals themselves, then we can make objective judgments about it. Sort of like, I guess, the law, a legal system. We have certain goals with the legal system, like protection of property, the protection of people, and the safety of people on the road. And we can create a set of rules, and we can draw actual objective statements from those set of rules. And these could be subjective to begin with, sort of like the law, but in a sort of social constructionist way, these become part of society and these become objective. So it doesn't matter that you believe that you shouldn't be ticketed for speeding, you're going to be ticketed for speeding. And that's basically what I can get from her take. And it's kind of a popular take. You hear certain people like Matt Dillahunty making this argument these days, that there is no overall objective standard, but we can create a moral framework that we can make objective judgments from.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, it's sort of talking about how there are these normative ethical standards, but they're not necessarily objective in a moral realist sense, you know. Which, I mean, again, is sort of looking at how things work in practice as well. It's what people can see going on, and you can understand that sort of take on things. So thank you for that one, Brina. Very interesting. And next we have a few grouped together. In fact, we're going to group the Emerson Green stream together and address them all at once.
Well, that's another hard one. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So it's like with almost everything in philosophy, I'm an agnostic in terms of but if someone put a gun in my head, I'd be a realist. I think they express cognitive truths. They're cognitively meaningful, and they're true irrespective of anyone else's opinion. Some of them are. It's like if you get really specific about all kinds of claims, but it's like just general claims. It's like, it's wrong to harm someone merely for the fun of it. It's like, yeah, I do think that's true. What the actual metaphysical grounding is, I'm also agnostic about. It could be something like Platonism. It could be like more an Aristotelian thing where there's just like these intrinsic tendencies and there's better ways that these can actually be coordinated or to actualize kind of potentials like that. There's an end there. I don't know. I don't really care really what that sort of like meta-ethical metaphysics is. I just mean that there's certain true facts about morality as in some sense traditionally conceived.
What is this question? Okay, do moral statements express truth? Where does truth come from? So yes, I think moral statements express truth. I think that it's wrong to cause pointless suffering to moral patients. Like, that's a true statement. It's an objective fact about our world, like regardless of whether God exists or not. Like God exists, that's still a fact. God doesn't exist, it's still a fact that the statement "it's wrong to cause pointless suffering to moral patients" is true. That's just a true fact. It's just a true thing about our world. So I'm a moral realist. Like I'm like 95% sure of moral realism, but I'm like torn between what's called moral naturalism and non-naturalism. Like you alluded to this as well. And I should probably interject that like this is not like an area I've spent a whole lot of time thinking about, so you should take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. But like they're both consistent with what I just said, about there being like moral facts and like this is true independent of God. And I go back and forth, but I'm sort of more inclined towards moral naturalism, which identifies moral properties with a concrete world, like I would say the experiential world, as opposed to some abstract world. So non-naturalists think that there's like something over and above the natural facts that make it the case, where I think that just natural facts make it the case that something is right or wrong. So one of the reasons that I like moral naturalism is that I think moral properties have causal influence. Whereas non-naturalists place them in this like abstract causally effete realm. So if I became a non-naturalist, I think I'd have to reject physical causal closure, since I'm fairly convinced that moral properties are causally efficacious. And that seems like something maybe to be avoided. I don't know. I don't think it's like this absolute thing that needs to be avoided. Breaking causal closure, I mean. But I just think there's less of a mystery on moral naturalism, like how we know moral truths compared to non-naturalism. Like I don't see how these causally inert non-natural properties could be like detected or motivating for us. But I go back and forth. Like, so some people say that like if you think intuition is a valid way of ascertaining moral truth, and that's like in conflict with moral naturalism. So I don't know about that, but I tend to think that intuition is a valid way. So yeah, I don't know. All I know is I'm fairly convinced of like moral realism. Beyond that, I'm not totally sure. You can make a proposition about morality that's true or false. So I think we're sort of on the same page about that, actually.
Oh, just as a side note, there is some guy, Graham Oddie, not Oppie, who argues for that like moral properties are like abstract and they're causally efficacious. I don't know the details about it, but that's like a description of what his actual position is.
Graham Oddie, you said?
Oddie, yeah, Oddie.
Okay, interesting. But yeah, I mean, I guess I would just add though that irreducibly normative truths, which is like the non-naturalist side, like even though that has its own problems, I think it sort of makes the best sense of like how something could be wrong just in virtue of objective properties of the world. But I just think that trying to integrate like moral properties like with the natural world is like a good idea, like for a few reasons I've like alluded to. So that's like an advantage. And so this is just like a suspicion, but I feel like moral naturalism has an easier time explaining like the flux of moral norms from like region to region and time to time. Is that Chris?
Oh, hey, Chris.
Hey guys, I'm really sorry. I feel bad. But something out of my control came up, so.
Oh, okay. Everything all right?
I had to eat dinner.
Interesting.
Okay, so we're not back for you for this, if that's the excuse. So,
can we do it after we finish the other questions?
Absolutely not.
Please, please.
Let me just finish. I was in the middle of saying in the middle of making a very intelligent point.
I know that's
so. I can't remember. Oh yeah, I was saying that moral naturalism, I think maybe can have an easier time accounting for like the change of moral norms from like time and culture and from like situation to situation even as contrasted with non-naturalism. I think it's like slightly harder with non-naturalism. But look, they're both forms of moral realism that atheists can believe in. Like we can have a robust account of objective morality, like wholly independent of God, and there's more than one good option. But I'm just kind of torn between those two. So anyway, Chris, you have 10 seconds. Moral realism, anti-realism, and if realism, naturalism or non-naturalism.
morals are real. I'm a moral naturalist. I lean towards a sort of like deontological virtue ethics position on the topic. And I like to call myself a natural law theorist, but I worry that people have too many Catholic, connotations with that term, right? Because I believe that ethical imperatives are placed upon us by certain like natural facts, right? Being in the community, having certain ends as a rational being or a rational creature, certain intrinsic dignities and values in objects and substances, that all of this together, and I can't think of any really good examples off the top of my head, but this general framework gives rise to certain imperatives, oughts, permissibilities, right, in the overall moral landscape to that was the best one I could think of. I really don't like Sam Harris. I'm sorry.
So that was Emerson Greenstream with Necessary Being, Emerson himself and Chris Rhodes. And starting off with Necessary Being, he says he leans towards moral realism, although he's largely agnostic on it. So moral realism is the thought that there is at least one moral truth above, personal and society's opinion. So if we go with a statement, it is wrong to torture a small child for fun, that would be true regardless of what a culture or society or anyone, thought of it. There's no way to justify this, right? But it means that there's at least one. So it doesn't mean that there has to be all objective morals. It just means that there is at least one. Now, he says he's unsure if he leans towards naturalism or non-naturalism. So naturalism is the thought that you can break down these objective morals into natural properties. Things like feeling good and all of that. And some people might even go so far as saying that's a bit of a naturalistic fallacy. But there are arguments for and against this position. Non-naturalism is basically saying that not all things are broken down into their natural properties. Some of them are human-made things, essentially, but they're still true even though they're human-made. They're true regardless of what people say. He mentions not all moral propositions are objective. So that's what I was saying earlier, even though there is at least one moral that is true regardless of what people believe, there are some that are society-based. There are some that are subjective. And when you're speaking descriptively, of course, there are these relative statements. He says moral statements make meaningful statements, but he's not sure if they exist platonically. So he's talking about in sort of the platonic realm that gives it a form.
Yep, good breakdown.
Emerson also mentions he's a moral realist as well. He speaks of pointless suffering. He's basically 95% sure on this position, but he's completely torn between naturalism and non-naturalism. And Chris Rhodes, again, a moral realist that goes for naturalism, and he speaks of deontology, virtue ethics, and law. They're all on a very similar page with what they say. And I think they're all in a similar state to where I am, which is why I probably find it easier to understand what they're saying than some of the others. I think I personally lean towards moral realism, and I think I actually lean towards non-naturalism myself. I do think there are some natural goods, some things that you can break down into that sort of natural thing, but some of them are non-natural. Although that's one bit I'm still going back and forth on, even though I think I lean quite heavily into moral realism. The naturalism, non-naturalism thing, I sort of a bit of a split on. But yeah, I mean, thank you for those answers, guys. It gave us a chance to introduce the concept of moral realism. And actually, if any of you would like to come on and talk about it in more detail and what led you to moral realism, that'd be really interesting, because I'd like to hear how different your experience of getting there was to mine. And next tonight we have Godless Granny.
Question 8. I'm with Vice Rhino on the problematic phrasing of this question. Why add the "for fun" part? Is torturing babies okay as long as your motivation isn't fun? I know Christians add that part because in the Bible, God killed lots of babies. He did it in the flood, in killing all the firstborn in Egypt, and in the cleansing of Canaan. But because God didn't do it for fun, that makes it okay? Once you see the problem in the phrasing of your question, it answers itself. Yes, moral statements express truth. We all know that torturing babies is wrong. The fact that Christians feel the need to tack on the "for fun" part shows that they know this is wrong, and they have to add something to excuse the behavior of their God that they know is wrong. If they know what their God is doing is wrong, then said God can't be the source of that knowledge. So where does that knowledge come from? Instinct. Survival of our species is instinctive. It isn't limited to humans. We aren't the only species that protect our young. If a God was the source of this truth, how did other animals get this truth? If God gave it to the animals, why do only some animals have this instinct? Some animals eat their young, not a very good survival instinct. Evolution, which has no moral goals, is the only explanation that makes sense to explain that variety. It is true regardless of what people believe. You might find an outlier or two that believes otherwise, but that doesn't change the truth of the statement. I think it expresses intuition or instinct. This is an area of moral philosophy where I am weak. I'm still working on understanding how something is true regardless of what people think. For example, slavery. It has always been wrong, even when the majority of people said otherwise. I'm sure there are things that we accept that one day reason will prove we were wrong on. So how could we have thought these right? I'm not sure how to answer these yet.
So that was Godless Granny, who has featured in pretty much every one of our videos because she gives some really great, well thought out answers. And we've even been on her channel recently to discuss logic and reason. So you should definitely check that video out on her channel as well. Now, she does bring up something here, which is contesting why we had to add the "for fun" in. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it was so people didn't have the opportunity to suggest some incredibly unrealistic circumstance where it could be considered moral. She did mention, though, that "for fun" is a way to excuse God. And I mean, that isn't why I tacked it on. And I'm not sure Christians always do either. For example, we could consider things like vaccinating children to be considered mild torture that is moral. And it stops conversations getting stuck on things like, how do you define torture? So she leans towards moral realism without fully being able to justify why, which is great because she's aware of the lack of knowledge and is definitely the sort of person to investigate further. And she even had Dave on to discuss this with her after doing this video. So after doing that video as well, she's actually come back and realized that, yes, she definitely is a moral realist and she's looking more into the position herself. There was a slight conflict in the statement between intuition and people having the wrong intuition and things being attitude independent, though. But I think that's one of the things that, whilst you're still trying to work through things, you can have some of these things come up and you don't quite realize the conflict there till you've worked through the problem and you look back at it and go, oh, yeah. So I completely get that one. But thank you for that, Godless Granny. And next night we've got a grouping. It's Bearded Heretic, Tjump, Ozien, and Steve Mcree.
I love Joe's face again. This is a hard question because, so do moral statements express truth? Short answer is yes. I'm going to say yes to this question. I think objectivity, there is objective moral lines. Where does this truth come from? I think is the hard part of this question. I'm going to take Julian Begini's lead on this, because again, I'm not a real philosophical person, right? But in A Short History of Truth, which is a great book, I suggest you read it. There's a chapter. Just find out what the chapter's called. I've got it right here because I'm a nerd. Called Moral Truths. Obviously, what the book looks like. Got some tabs. Where he discusses about this kind of topic, and he talks about how rationality doesn't necessarily need to lead us to truth as much as we think it does. Like, and he uses the example of a psychopath. It is a generic psychopath. It's not specific. Like, not a psychologist, so I don't expect him to get the definition entirely correct. But what he says is that psychopaths lack empathy, not rationality. And I think that that is the key to my answer to this question. That empathy is understanding other people feel things, and that they might feel different to you about stuff, and they may experience things in a different way. They may take things in a different way, but also that everyone has a feeling, everyone has an emotion reaction, right? And that other people can feel pain, can feel heartache, can feel distress, and that is the evolutionary reason why we don't hurt other people. Yeah, and the evolutionary kind of line for that is that in order to form social groups, we shouldn't have been hurting other people, right? But I think you can actually draw some objectivity here, because if you find out, like, the more facts you learn about the universe and about people specifically, the more you're guided into moral situations, moral judgments and stuff. So if you are torturing a child for fun, a fact might be that you learn that torture causes extreme pain. Yeah. So that might be a fact you learn. The fact you also will learn is that children have experiences. Children feel pain, etc., etc. And basically you'll go down this line, and then the more facts you learn, the more you realize that actually torturing children is wrong, because you wouldn't want to be in that situation. You wouldn't want to feel that pain, and then you wouldn't do it because of that reason. So for me, the more facts you learn about that stuff makes it more true. Not makes it more true, makes you realize that it is true. That moral statements express truth. Yeah, that's my view. So, and an example of this is that a lot of offending behavior occurs when people have distorted views of reality, such as like thinking that, like if we think about myths around, I'm going to use trigger warning. I'm going to use SA. So, if we think about myths around sexual assault, such as, he was out late at night, deserved it. She was wearing a short skirt, she deserved it. Stuff like that. Actually, when you look at the facts, you realize that none of those actually influence the statistics or anything like that, and therefore, you kind of realize that it's not her fault at all, and that thing was immoral. Even if you hold those beliefs before and think that, well, it's her fault, she shouldn't have been doing this, right? So that's kind of what I mean. For instance, once you learn that people who are gay can't control that, they don't choose to be gay or not be gay, you realize that, okay, that's not a choice, it's them as an individual. Yeah. And then you can become more accepting of that. That for me is really the key to it. So yeah, I think morality is objective, and I think that it is based in truth, and I think that truth is a collection of facts put together, rather than it just being the statement true on its own accord. How did I do? Was that okay?
Yes, I am a moral realist. Except torturing babies is totally fine. That's okay.
What do you think makes it true? For example,
I think that what makes it true is its correspondence to reality. I think that moral statements are a law of nature, like gravity is a law of nature.
Okay, this is a great question. So I do believe that there is objective morality in this essence that I believe that we evolved, that we're not a blank slate, and that there are certain aspects of what it is to be human that we all appreciate, or majority of us do. And I think of the exceptions sort of prove the majority, right? So there might be somebody that wants to experience pain, but that pain brings them pleasure. So I think people are pleasure seekers. I think that we don't want to experience pain. We don't want to be violated. We don't want people to do things against our wishes, against our will. I think morality is around consent. That if you don't, but then there's the idea: what if you're unconscious? But if they were conscious, would they have consented to it? And so there's that. So you don't do anything that violates people's consent. And I follow what's called the non-aggression principle, which is I don't initiate aggression, but I can respond with aggression to stop your aggression. Like you steal from me, I can stop you from stealing with me. You attack me or family or the guy next to me, I can stop you from doing that. Even though it's non-consensual in that regard, I'm stopping the non-consensual act. So that's moral to do, to stop non-consensual acts, even though I get that it's non-consensual. And but that's really my morality, is surrounding that. You don't steal because no one wants to be steal from, because steal is a non-consensual act, and so you don't want non-consensual things done to you. If you do, then they're consensual, right? So it's like it's in the definitions of the morals, right? Don't steal, don't kill, or don't murder. Don't murder, which is non-consensual. You weren't an aggressor. You're preventing aggression. Basically, that's murder. I went to law school, so I could talk about that more if you wanted to. If you have any questions about it, go ahead. So my morality expresses how we have a social contract in the world between each other, that we don't violate our will, even though we do all the time. We violate it all the time. We're immoral people. I think for the most part, we think we're trying to be moral. I don't think the Bible solves any answers. I think the Bible is tremendously immoral in many ways. I made videos about that also, and sort of ranted about that. But anyways, that's what I have to say about that.
All right, number 8. Do moral statements express truth? All right. There's really two ways to look at two main categories of this question. There's what's called moral cognitivism, and then there's moral non-cognitivism. Most people I talk to tend to moral cognitivism. That is the position that moral propositions do state moral facts. In moral cognitivism, there's two main subgroups. There's moral objectivist and moral subjectivist. The moral objectivist thinks that moral facts do exist, and they are in fact something that do exist independently whether we exist or not, but they are something that has an objectivity to them, grounded upon whatever your moral grounding is. Most people do eudaimonia, or flourishing of societies, which is a hypothetical imperative. That's fine. It's not categorical, hypothetical imperative, which means goal-oriented. So if you have a specific goal in mind, which is the flourishing of society, you can build an objective moral framework from that, which what objective morality is predicated upon. I have no issue with that. Subjectivist says that no, all morals are subjective. I don't think that's the case. I think that, yes, sure, there's subjectivity involved, but I think that once we have a proper grounding of something, we can have an objective moral framework. And I do think there are objective moral facts that exist independently of subjective opinion. Which, for example, if we have an objective moral framework on eudaimonia, and I say, look, it is immoral to be cruel just for the sake of being cruel, that is objectively true. And I think all cultures would recognize that as well, not to appeal to cultural relativism, but I think all societies have recognized that it harms society to be cruel just for the sake of being cruel. Most people would recognize that as an objective truth. And what do we talk about when we have moralities? It's to how we all get along in society. And I think that objectively we can learn that if that statement is true, if we harm people just for the sake of being cruel, societies would not flourish. That is an objective thing we could observe. And I think that all societies have observed that because we've seen societies not flourish when we have people that are evil and are cruel just for the sake of being cruel. Sociopaths, right? Most societies tend to frown upon sociopaths. This is an objective thing. And so when we were using these terms like objective, subjective, there's very specific things in there. Maki says, I feel an embedding problem coming on called freak. Yes, and of course, that's an argument against non-cognitivism, which is a good argument against non-cognitivism. But anyways, that's the difference between subjective and objective morals. In a nutshell, that's really, really a watered-down version for simplicity's sake. But the moral non-cognitivist says that there's really there are moral anti-realists that says, look, no, moral propositions are not truth out. They don't express moral facts. They express something else. The prescriptivist would say stealing is wrong. It's inferred and interpreted to be don't steal. It's prescribing an action. Don't steal. So there's really no moral fact of the matter to be had. There's no truth maker that makes a statement stealing is wrong, true or false. Therefore, it's not truth out. There's no truth maker that exists there. There's nothing that's a truth bearer there. It's not truth bearing. And so if something's not truth bearing because it has no truth maker that makes it the case, the non-cognitivist will have to find some other reason to talk about moral theology or moral conditions. So one of the, which again, prescriptivism. Another one being emotivism, or some people call it the booyah theory. But emotivist would argue stealing is wrong does not express a proposition. What it is an emotional disposition. It is an attitude. Bad stealing. Stealing is bad. Boo! Don't steal. Not even stealing is bad. It's propositional. It's more boo. Yeah, emotivism would not be stealing is bad. Emotivism would be boo stealing. Or something that's permissible, stealing, yay. That's why it's called booyah theory, right? Or booyah theory. Because it expresses an emotional things. And most non-cognitivists would probably to some degree say that these moral statements are attitudes towards something rather than propositional. And so the moral non-cognitivist has a problem though, as Mackie pointed out, the embedding problem. How is it you get in these arguments any kind of meaning out of them if these things do not express something propositionally, right? How can I make a moral argument about stealing if there's no more propositional thing there other than boo stealing? There's an embedding problem. You can't embed it in these arguments. And Geach-Frege had pointed that out. It's called the Frege-Geach embedding problem. And I think it is a good argument against non-cognitivism because you can't embed them into some kind of logical argument. But that's still the two groups. Now, I am a moral cognitivist. I do tend to moral objective morality. That doesn't mean that there are not morals that are not subjective. Of course, there's subjective morality. But all objective morality requires is one objective moral fact that exists independently of anything else. And I think that does. I think they do exist. I think there's more than just one. I think, and again, they're always true, regardless of your feelings. And again, just like A equals A is true regardless of your feelings. A equals A is true. And somebody says, well, I don't believe A equals A. Okay, well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't change the fact that A equals A, right? You can subjectively believe that it's not. You can subjectively believe that an objective moral fact is not objectively a moral fact. Doesn't mean that it isn't. It means that you have a different take on it. So what? Doesn't change the fact that it is still an objective moral fact because everybody can discover it. Every society out there has discovered that if you're cruel to be the sake of cruel, for example, here's an objective moral fact. If everybody commits murder, societies won't flourish. If we all out killing each other, right, and everybody dies, you just kill the society. Your flourishing has ended. You have ended the society. It is an objective fact that if everybody killed each other, we would not flourish. That is objective. There's no subjective opinion. It doesn't matter whether you believe that or not. It's objectively the case, right? So it is objective moral fact that doing that would not lead to human flourishing. So once you ground something, that's how you have these objective statements.
Okay, so that was quite a few all blocked together. The first one was our very own Luke, or Bearded Heretic. And he says that he leans towards moral realism. He thinks that there are certain statements that are just true, regardless of whether or not somebody believes them. But he thinks that it's a number of different truths that lead to that particular truth. So, like psychology, the way people should be treated, human rights, all that kind of thing can go into creating this moral truth. And it sounds like he leans towards a form of moral naturalism, because he believes that these truths are kind of grounded in actual natural truths themselves, like pleasure, pain, suffering, like I said, human psychology, all that kind of stuff. The one after that was Tjump, and Tjump is a moral realist. It's a kind of moral naturalism. From what I understand of his position from watching some of his other videos, it's a best of all possible world scenario. So you start with the idea of what is the best possible world, and the further away you get from that, the more immoral that world becomes. So the most moral world is one where you have your own universe, and nothing impinges on your will. So you are basically a god with your own universe, and you can do whatever you like. Ozien from Ozien Talks, he says it's a great question. So that one's aimed at you, yeah. He believes in a form of objective morality, and that we're not a blank slate, so not a tabula rasa. And he thinks pain brings people pleasure. People are pleasure seekers. We don't want our will violated. We don't want people to go against things that we consent to. He argues for the libertarian non-aggression principle. So the main thing for morality is the idea of consent and social contract. Social contracts. And finally, I've also seen Ozien mention recently that he considers himself a moral naturalist. That seems to best explain his position. And Steve Mcree is a moral realist. He's not exactly sure how to ground that as such, but he does believe that there are moral truths and we can get epistemic access to them. And he's also a value pluralist.
Awesome. Yeah, great rundown there, Dave. And surprising, actually, to see so many people responding, at least with video comments, that were moral realists. I thought that we were going to be heavily outnumbered. Because our position, especially in atheist circles, is not a particularly common one. So I'm surprised that there were so many of you that had a similar position. And next tonight we've got Godless Scummer.
That's a fantastic question. That is an absolutely fantastic question. No, I haven't really. I feel in a way that's touching a little bit on the objective morality versus subjective thing, which is not something I've really dived into. I mean, with the example given there, I like to say I think we'd all agree that torturing a child is immoral. Now, I would again. It depends. This again now. Depends on how we're looking at that. What scale of torture are we looking at there? Because things like corporal punishment, for example, used to be seen as a very much more acceptable thing. But we know now that it's actually a bit, as sort of societies changed, that it can be harmful. I guess it's a question I'm not entirely sure of the answer on for an overall thing. Now I know that the example that there is just one example, but the overall spirit of the question is one I don't think I quite know the answer to, but I kind of feel a lot of the time is, as we as a species are always trying to get better at this stuff, and again, the whole objective versus subjective morality is not a question I honestly dived into too much, and I don't have a definitive answer on it one way or the other. I'm sorry, I can't answer.
And that was Jeff, or Godless Scummer. And one thing I like about Jeff is he's always very honest and authentic. And in short, he says he's not sure. Brilliant.
Great answer, yeah.
Yeah, it is a great answer. And he does say that he thinks that everyone would think that the example I gave would say is immoral, and that we're all trying to get better at morality. I think that what we can infer from that is he's not sure if there is an absolute truth or anything like that. He realizes there's this concept of morality that we're all trying to get better at and build this best picture. But whether this best picture is something that is truth, or it's still just going to be we're all trying to move to a bit where we all believe something is true or immoral, for example, then I don't know. But I mean, Jeff, thank you for that answer. It's always refreshing to hear, especially when it's something that is on video, that's something that's going to be put out there. Just to hear people publicly go, well, I don't know, because it just doesn't happen. People are so fixed and firm in their positions, and this is definitely the way it is, and you're just like, oh. So no, cheers, Jeff.
Yeah, brilliant.
Next tonight we have Vinx 909.
I've yet to see any proof of wrongness. I do think it's harmful to kids' mental and potentially physical well-being. Thus should not be done if we care about such things. But it's predicated on that if. We can look at the results of an action, but nothing about that says if those actions should be done. The classic ought-is problem. So no, I don't think moral statements express truth, for I've seen no evidence for the truth in them.
If yes, what do you think makes it true? For example, is it the society, the people, or is it true regardless of what people believe? If no, what do you think it actually expresses? Is it emotions or intuitions, or are you giving people instructions?
Yes, all three. Probably more. What we call moral statements are things we want people to do because they fall in line with our preferences. I think it's said rather well by Death Interprets the Hawkfather.
Tell me...
What would have happened if you hadn't saved him?
Yes.
The sun would not have risen.
Then what would have happened?
A mere ball of flaming gas would have illuminated the world.
All right, I'm not stupid. You're saying that humans need fantasies to make life bearable?
No. Humans need fantasy to be human. To be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape.
With tooth fairies, hogfathers.
Yes. As practice, you have to start out learning to believe the little lies.
So we can believe the big ones.
Yes. Justice, mercy, duty, that sort of thing.
They're not the same at all.
You think so? Then take the universe and grind it down to the finest powder and sieve it through the finest sieve, and then show me one atom of justice, one molecule of mercy. And yet, you try to act as if there is some ideal order in the world, as if there is some rightness in the universe by which it may be judged.
But people have got to believe that. What's the point?
You need to believe in things that aren't true. How else can they become?
It's not real. It doesn't exist in reality. But it's real to us. We make it real.
Okay, and that was Vinx 909, who was a latecomer to answering the questions. We were up to about question 6 when we finally found his video.
Yeah,
something like that. And this is the first one that we're kind of bringing him in on. And this is a really great answer and a really interesting one, and very different to what others have kind of said. And anybody that uses Terry Pratchett to answer a question, big up in my book.
Yeah, definitely.
Top lad. So this one is kind of interesting. He brings up the Izzot problem. You know, the Izzot problem is basically we can't look at some state of the world and say that there isn't aught that can be derived from it. So if we look out and we see it's raining and we know we're going to get wet, there is nothing in those facts that lead us to this idea that we have to take our umbrella. You know, I mean, if we want to stay dry, we take our umbrella, but there is no actual truth in the matter that it's raining that states that we then have to take our umbrella. And this is what he's kind of arguing, that there is no actual moral truth inherent in the universe. And this is sort of the argument made by Death in the clip from the Hogfather that he plays, that things like justice and mercy and duty and morality are fictions that we tell ourselves. They're little white lies. We start with all these little white lies like Santa Claus, you know, that kind of stuff. And we use those to create bigger and bigger fictional pictures, but they're useful fictions. Santa Claus is a useful fiction because it teaches kids to behave and teaches them they'll be rewarded if, you know, they do the right thing. And that's what he's arguing that something like morality is. It's a useful fiction that we tell ourselves in order to create order in the world and make life better for ourselves. But if we were to just remove everything from the universe, there is no properties in the universe that are mercy. These are human fictions that we've created to help us.
It's a really interesting take, actually. Really, really quite thought-provoking. The most unique of the night. And actually, he had a number of other great answers as well. It's such a shame that we didn't catch him right at the beginning, because he'd have definitely been in a lot more of our videos. Yeah. So basically, I'm not entirely convinced myself that just because we've come up with the concepts of things like justice, etc., there still isn't these truths that are there. I think that's why I sort of lean towards the non-naturalist side of the moral realism. Even though there are some natural goods, they're not necessarily, you know, there's more justification for why they're moral goods just than, well, it's good because it's natural sort of thing. But this is the sort of argument that when it's presented to me will make me just sit back and go, I don't have a ton of justification for rejecting this one over mine. They essentially end up in much of the same position, because it's this sort of, it's sort of like quasi-realism versus realism, you know. But yeah, no, I as you can tell, my head's reeling and thinking about this one more and more, and I think I'd love to have a chat about him and his position in more detail at some point in the future as well. 'Cause it seems like a really interesting dude. So.
And moral fictionalism isn't really something that a lot of people discuss. It's not really brought up very often. It is kind of a fast. I mean, if you think about our legal systems, they're fictional.
Oh yeah.
They're things that we create in order to make our lives better, and they're truths that we tell ourselves in order to make our societies better. And that's, these are interesting slants on it.
Yeah. Definitely something I need to look into more myself as well, and work through my thoughts on that. I mean, who knows? When I look into this in more detail, I may end up changing my position on the topic. But thank you so much for that one, Vinx. Absolutely brilliant take. Did you have anything else you wanted to add to that one?
Nope, just that moral fictionalism is a position I'm very sympathetic to. I'm not wholly convinced, but I think it is a very powerful argument.
Yeah, fair. Yeah, I agree with that. Still too busy thinking about it. So whilst I'm thinking about it, we're going to move on to our last video of the night, but not the last comment of the night. And that's from Daniel Kelly.
Yeah, so I think this question actually excites me a little bit more than philosophy of religion, this entire area of metaethics. So do I think there are moral facts? My answer is no. And I think a lot of philosophers do actually hold to moral realism. And I'm going to respect the professional philosophers far more than my layman attempts. But equally, I do think some of that could quite possibly be from, the Christian legacy that still survives in Western philosophy and Western thought, that, moral facts exist. I don't think, though, that we actually understand what people do on the ground. And a lot of this thinking about morality doesn't actually really build itself on sort of good empirical evidence of what people are actually doing when they're making these sort of claims out in the wild, and how people think about these things when they're negotiating in day-to-day circumstances. So, against a philosopher, I might describe myself as more error theorist, but in general, I'll probably describe myself as a moral chaos theorist, in that I think there's a lot of stuff going on here, and a single meta-ethical view that's going to comprehensively capture all these different conversations that happen between humans, I don't think is within our realm. So what I prefer is to try to avoid moral language myself. I utilize a system more often than not called nonviolent communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I think it's more pragmatic and more useful. And I think rather than positing these external facts, actually it brings more of the ownership to us. So I think that we as humans just have needs. We need food, we need water, shelter, sex, all these other things. And living in a social society and being built as social creatures, we have to negotiate for these things. And we do have empathy with the needs of others as well. And it's this complex web. And so rather than moral facts as these things that we discover innate within our existence in the universe, instead, they are things that we invent, that we create. They are the negotiations, the laws that we create for one another to help predict one another's behavior and establish things that are going to help us all reach our common needs.
So that was Daniel Kelly, another latecomer to the video, so that you may have seen him in the previous video. He mentions that there's no moral facts, but he acknowledges most philosophers are moral realists. he would describe himself as an error theorist or a chaos theorist. Now, I've not heard of the chaos theorist, but the error theory is essentially combining moral cognitivism and moral nihilism. So it's still saying that the statements are propositional, but because there's no actual moral facts, that all the statements are false. And that's what he mentions right at the beginning, with there being no moral facts. He also says he tries to avoid moral language because morals describe a complex web of things we need to invent or negotiate to reach common needs, which kind of sounds similar to that fictionalist perspective of Vinx before. And the fact that he tries to avoid moral language sounds like Mueller's amoral language, which was someone that we found on YouTube last year, wasn't it, Dave?
Yeah, and he's got a book out called The Moral Fool, discussing this position.
I mean, I can understand trying to avoid moral language, especially in certain situations. There are so many times we put like using moral language, putting this sort of moral judgment on things that don't actually have any need for a moral judgment for it. There's better words to use, and I do think that we should be careful with our language, not just in terms of morality, but the words that we use. We should choose them carefully. For example, we shouldn't use words which have a psychological diagnosis glibly. We shouldn't call people delusional if we're not saying that they are someone who is suffering from delusions, they are mentally ill. If you're just using delusional to mean that they're wrong, well, why are you using this language? Why can't you just say that they're mistaken or misguided or something like that? And the same sort of thing can be said for moral language. Do you have to phrase what you're saying in terms of moral language? Now, I would personally disagree with the fact that of never using it, because I do think there are certain moral truths. So there are times when you need that moral judgment. It's quite easy to have a conversation with someone where they are, using other words. You can sort of infer what they mean. So yeah, I mean, quite an interesting position to hold as well. And Daniel, what do you mean by this chaos theorist as well? I'd like to know a bit more from that. I mean, from what you said, it did sound like you were describing error theory, but yeah, this chaos theorist sounds interesting. Did you have anything to add on that one?
Nope, just that it was a great answer and a very interesting one, and one I can be kind of sympathetic to, because moral facts do just seem to have this plasticity to it, where how are they grounded? What kind of property are they? And him saying, he understands that most philosophers are moral realists. I suppose you could argue here and say, well, you shouldn't follow that just because most philosophers are moral realists, because there's still plenty that aren't.
No, exactly. I mean, I think it's actually 66% or something like that from the 2020 survey. So, I mean, there's still a large chunk, and you shouldn't do it as Dave says just because the large majority do accept it. You should have good justifications beyond, most philosophers agree with this position. You should actually look into it and find your own justifications and why you find a particular position more convincing than others. So yeah, I tend to think that it's good to acknowledge that you at least have some sort of awareness of where the current thoughts are headed, and I think more are becoming moral realists based on the previous survey, which was that 2012.
I thought it had dropped by about 4% or 5% or something. I can't remember, to be honest.
I'll bring the stats up in just a second. But I think it's good to be aware of what the current positions are, and I mean the flip side is, philosophers do spend a lot of time looking into this stuff and thinking about this stuff, and they would probably know better, especially than someone like me, who hasn't had the formal training in it. So um, they would know, but it's not like it's 95% of them are moral realists. It's, we're in the 60%, so it's still very much unsolved. And that's one thing that actually annoys me about many people who like to claim morality's solved. We've solved morality. No, no, we haven't. Generally, the people who think they've solved morality are the ones who are using the definitions where morality is your personal morals and values. Therefore, it's subjective. Well, yes, if you're going to define it into a conclusion, then of course, but that's not how the topic's actually usually discussed. So yeah, lots of interesting videos tonight. And this next segment, we're going to have a look at some of the text responses. There were tons of them. As expected, there was a lot of subjectivism and relativism in the text responses. And I'm just going to address a few of them here and just explain a little bit about them and my opinion on them. So, first one is morals are subjective. I base my morals on well-being. I don't want people to do bad thing to me, so I do my best not to do bad things to others. So, I mean, this is obviously just the inference that I get from the way this one was worded, but it seemed to be stating morals are subjective as a fact. It's almost going back to that whole this morality thing being a form of subjectivism. Yet he bases his morals on well-being. So if you base your morals on well-being, you can make objective statements about what best represents well-being. But I get what he's saying. He's saying it's what makes it true for him. So if we decided, if morals were subjective, if I decided it was moral for me to go and punch that guy in the face, it would be perfectly moral for me to do so. He wouldn't like it, but if he was to turn around and go, no, I don't think it's moral for you to punch me in the face, that would be an error in what he's saying, because he thinks morals are subjective. So what he's actually saying with that is, I don't like that it's moral for you to punch me in the face. Because if morals are subjective, as in moral subjectivism, the truth maker is the personal opinion, so therefore it's moral for me to punch him in the face. One of the reasons I don't think that moral subjectivism really works. The next one is, sometimes, if I say an agent's action has the property of being bad, that is me expressing a proposition I take to be true. If you are a non-cognitivist, then I do not see how you get around the fregegiche problem, or express everyday moral language where people appear to make statements that are true or false. I think these statements are true in virtue of when they correspond to irreducible moral properties in the world, like good, bad, right, wrong, etc. I do not think those properties can be broken down to other properties, so I think non-naturalism is right, and I take a Korsgaard/Kant constructivist view of where the truth comes from. Rational beings recognize that performing certain actions or thinking an action should or should not be performed and can have logical implications. If I say agent A may or may not perform act X and agent B is in the same position as A, it follows, other things equal, that B may not perform X. So I think rational beings, in virtue of having reason, can recognize moral properties and determine implications of when they ought to perform an action.
That's a very good answer. Okay, so the Frege thing is basically non-cognitivists say that, moral statements don't actually have any real meaning. They're more like expressions of emotion, like, I don't like stealing. But the problem is then these actual sentences can be used to construct actual meaningful sentences. So we're not just saying, I don't like stealing. It's something greater than that. So there's this problem where if these simple sentences, like stealing is wrong, result in the sense of the sense of the sentence being, damn it, stealing. Damn it, stealing is bad. You know, that kind of thing. The term bad doesn't really mean anything. But yet we can construct greater sentences than this, like stealing from starving orphans is bad. The moral language there says more than just I don't like it. It seems to infer some greater property. So how do non-cognitivists overcome this sense of the moral language?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I hadn't heard of this particular one before today, so but it's a much more well put line of my thinking about non-cognitivism in general.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's sort of like I get the agnostic position or atheist position in that they say, you know, the word God has no real meaning because it's this garbled mess and there's no actual good, clear definition. But when we speak about God, there does seem to be some other meaning inherent, and we can transfer meaning from one to another about what's being spoken about, which is one of the reasons I'm not an agnostic.
Yeah. Even though there is a certain level of incoherence that feeds the reason why you're an atheist, why you believe gods don't exist, but you don't stop at, well, the whole concept's incoherent, so I don't consider it past that.
Yeah, because, you know, there is meaning derived from the sentiment when we say, and the word God, yes, the actual definition is kind of incoherent, but there's this greater sense of, well, there's this being that's above everything else, and it's created the universe, and it still has these properties that we can kind of understand.
Yeah. Really good answer, that one. Next one is they say, no, I think they express beliefs. If said beliefs are universal enough, then they can be accepted as fact. But, in my opinion, the fact that some people break this moral code is proof that it's your beliefs, because if they believed in it too, they wouldn't have done the wrong thing. Now, this is sort of a mistake I think a lot of people make. They sort of say, well, everybody has to agree on what's moral for it to be a fact. But there are so many facts that people don't agree on. The efficacy of vaccines, the safety of vaccines, the shape of the earth, you know, the various gods or lack of. There are so many things that people don't agree on, that you know, believe or don't believe to be true, that I don't think saying that people have different beliefs about something is enough justification to conclude that they are just beliefs. Now, I do understand the position where it's just expressing beliefs or emotions or anything like that. I just think that this particular justification is incomplete.
Yeah, another thing is many people believe many things and they break them all the time. Just because somebody breaks something that they believe doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong or that they don't believe it. It's just we're humans. Sometimes we do things against what we would claim to believe.
Yeah, that's true. So the next one is, this is kind of a vague question to me. I'm currently a moral realist and believe morality is objective in some sense, but what is a moral statement? Well, a moral statement is a statement made using moral language, and the point of the question was trying to find out is this statement a proposition, as in does it have a truth value, or is it just a statement that uses moral language? He then goes on to say, to me, it seems like a statement expresses a particular belief about morality as opposed to measuring the morality of a particular action. So, I believe there are true things to be said about moral propositions, but let's say blanket moral statements like stealing is bad are false because morality is based on individual actions, not generalities. he seems to almost be slightly arguing against himself there, but maybe he's trying to talk about contextual things. So, like we mentioned earlier in the stream, like you could have like a general rule of stealing is bad, but then in certain contexts, we could actually say maybe it's the moral thing to do. I don't know. What did you get from that one?
I mean, his statement that is claimed that morals kind of propositions speak to individual actions and not group actions. I'd say that might be true in some contexts, I guess, but if you think about something like the categorical imperative, it speaks about what is right and wrong for everybody. Not individual actions, but like the whole group of people that fall under this categorical imperative, it's speaking to their actions. But yeah, it seems a bit strange because I can make a statement, my laptop is on my desk. That's a statement. It's also propositional. I can also make a statement like, I prefer Absolute Radio 90s to Kiss FM. I mean, that's not propositional, but it's still a statement.
Mm-hmm.
So I suppose in some ways, you could maybe say the language needed to be picked apart when you said it, but it also seems to be where you can understand the context that you were asking about propositions and whether, because you added, do they express truth, which means are these statements propositional?
Well, yes. I mean, I thought I was being obvious, but clearly I wasn't if someone didn't get it. Another example of a statement that isn't propositional in any way, because you could always turn that one, that your one about your preferences, it is true that is your preference. But you could turn it into an instruction as a statement, isn't it? Go outside.
Yeah. That's why most things are broken down into commands, directives, propositions.
Yeah.
It can be broken down even further and further, but generally you can get the sense of what is being meant in a statement by the language surrounding it.
Yeah. So next one is, do moral statements express truth? Sometimes. Where does the truth come from? It's an emergent property assigned to propositions being in accordance with observable reality. Truth doesn't exist as an extant thing. Interesting. So, what is truth?
I mean, the truth makers, there's external realities that are the truth makers in some statements.
Yeah. Going back to some of the ones we mentioned earlier, like, the shape of the earth. So.
Yeah, that one's a little confusing.
Yes, moral statements express truths, but only in so much as they reflect the needs of human societies. I don't think that objective moral truths can exist. Morality is a human invention which we evolved the capacity to develop as a necessary component of our social structure. I can understand this take on morality. It's quite a common one. He's basically arguing for a form of moral relativism. I'm not sure morality was so much invented as somewhat discovered or thought out, in the same way that you could say, numbers or the rules of logic. They're more statements about things that are somewhat there, even that our language gives form. Do you have any additional takes on that?
No, that was good.
I'll cover off two more, and then the rest of them, if you guys are interested, you'll just have to read the comments under the original video. So this one, well, this goes back to number 5. It's true as long as we agree on some goals and a system. Morality is analogous to mathematics. People think that math is the most objective thing ever, but it's not. Mathematics has a subjective underbelly. It's a social construct. Humans invented it, and anyone can make up their own system of math at any time, even one that's intentionally confusing and arbitrary. But since we've agreed for a long time on the system of math we use, we've gotten really good at it over the centuries. And now it's an incredible tool that allows us to study the nature of light, gravity, existence. We've used it to put robot on Mars and men on the moon. it's an extremely powerful tool because we agree on a system and some goals. Imagine what we could do if we all agreed on a moral system and that our goal is that it benefits humans, one that could be improved over time. That would allow us to study things through that framework and get good at it, but religion impedes that. They think that they already have the true moral system. It doesn't matter that even members of the same church will have wildly fluctuating stances. Some Christians are fine with gay people, for example. Others want them to be executed by the state. I mean, right now, not the Middle Ages, but now. Real people believe that. With that kind of room, how can anyone suspect that they have any claim on morality? That's a hell of a question. I couldn't answer it and make it any shorter. I could probably write a book on it.
And lots of people have.
So, I don't think something being a social construct necessarily means that it also can't be objective. Things can become objective over time. Consider like certain tools. They were once just ideas that people have of let's try this, and over time they became the standard of how to cut wood or bang a nail into the wall. And these tools do get improved as our technology improves as well. So they're an objective standard that is improving over time. But talking about maths, I mean, let's make it a bit simpler. You go to numbers. Language gives numbers form, but if one glass is still one glass, even if we don't call it one glass, the referent is the same, even if the language changes. And maths adds more to it. So I don't know, 2 items. I've got Peppa Big bowl. I wish I had 2 options. There you go. Books. Right. 1 book. Oh, you can't see it. 1 book. 2 books. That one's quite relevant to tonight. The Ethics Toolkit. But there you go. That's maths. 1 + 1 is 2. That wouldn't change even if we changed the language that was there. There would still be 2 books in my hand. So yeah, okay, humans invented it in the sense that they gave language to it, but I'd say it's more of a case of discovery. It's something that works. It's something that we use to describe reality. Things like Pythagoras' theorem, it works. If someone disagrees with it, it doesn't mean it stops working. You can imply it incorrectly, of course. So I'm not sure I completely agree with what you're taking there, but you seem to also be leaning towards, something practiced over time does become more of this standard. You think that people have to agree to it for there to be the truth. But again, we've seen that there are plenty of things that people don't agree on that are still true. Some people are just wrong. So your answer was interesting, and I sort of can pick bits out of it that I do agree with, and it draws some good points, but I don't agree with it in its entirety. Is there anything you wanted to add to that one, Dave?
No, that was good. I'm a little confused by his answer myself, like saying that we can create a completely arbitrary version of maths and come up with something completely arbitrary, and I'm not sure that's quite correct, but I don't quite know what he means either.
No, that's fair. And the last one that we'll cover off tonight, because, as I said, you can read the rest of the responses. And if any of you read them and you want us to go into detail about them, please just send us a message or anything like that. And we will go into more of these. But this one is torturing children. Maybe there's a race of beings in the Delta Quadrant whose young offspring just love being tortured. Right. So if they love being tortured, then how is it torture? This is the sort of response that I was trying to avoid with torturing small children for fun, right? It was supposed to convey exactly what I meant, but there are still some people who responded like this. However, he does go on to say, But for us Homo sapiens, torturing children is inherently wrong. I won't bother listing the obvious evolutionary reasons for our innate desire to protect our young. Also, our species is capable of living in massive cities together, successfully, relatively, and even capable of altruism. That is why we're a successful species. We don't poop near our food, we don't torture children, and the civilized among us feel compassion toward each other, even towards other species. Evolution is amazing. So there's bits that you can pick out from this answer. I agree with what it's sort of saying in the spirit of it. You know, the first bit was more of a tongue-in-cheek joke than this is, you know, at least that's how I'm going to take it. But it was a good example of that sort of response that I was trying to miss. Now, he's saying torturing children is inherently wrong. So that would lead me to believe that he's arguing for a form of moral realism. Is that what you would get from that, Dave?
Yeah, at least contextual to humans, I guess, because he brings up that odd counterfactual. But I mean, you could say, in essence, that he's taking a kind of equivocation or like a really vague reading of the statement torturing small children for fun. He's not taking the intent where it's fun for the individual doing the torture and not for the kid. And the point of saying, you know, torturing a kid for fun is usually to convey that there was no purpose to it. Whereas if there was a small child that enjoyed being tortured, there would be a purpose to that torture beyond self-pleasure for the person doing it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, as I said, there's tons of other responses. I mean, we've actually had so many responses on these videos. It's actually been really good. We've had, you know, hundreds under both the theists and atheist ones, and we're really appreciative of all the responses. And we're looking forward to releasing the next set of questions as well. Because we've been enjoying doing this so much that later in the year we've got a plan for more to come in. And hopefully we can get more of you doing some video responses as well, so we can include some fresh faces, some new channels and everything like that, and get to know a few more people in person. Because when you are reading out the text responses, it can be hard to know exactly what you mean. There's a lot lost through purely text-based speech. So I apologize if we misrepresented any of you. That's why I've left your names off of this one, so that in case I have misrepresented you, and someone decides that they're going to go after you, as sometimes people do on the internet, that won't happen, because all they'll see on the screen is the text. But thank you very much for your responses. Dave, is there anything you wanted to cover tonight before we sign off?
Nope, just that there was a lot of very interesting answers in there, some of them kind of confusing, but it was fun responding to them.
Yeah, it definitely was. And as I mentioned, there's a couple of videos worth checking out. Certain things like the problem of dirty hands, moral particularism and value pluralism, objective morality, be realist. I think they're the main videos that we've done. Also, if you're just interested in a short overview of meta ethics, there is one of the sci-fi shorts, Morally True, which basically goes through the cognitivist and non-cognitivist theories really, really quickly. At least quick for us, 10 minutes, you know. Cool. So check out those videos if they interest you, and come back at us if you've got anything you want clarified. Thank you, everybody who has watched tonight. You've been watching Answers in Reason, review of 10 Questions for Atheists. This was question 8, and I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
Have a good one.
Good night, all.